Hello everyone, my name is Morgan Dowie. The purpose of this video is to discuss China's one-child policy. I'm going to start by giving some historical context for the program, and then I'm going to get into some implications, and then we will close by talking about where China's at right now with their one-child policy. So just to jump right into it, Mao Zedong was the first chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. He was officially the leader of China from around 1949 through to 1976, when he died. And his sort of core belief in terms of population was effectively more people equals more power. And this is pretty well in line with traditional Chinese values. China has been one of the most populous civilizations for almost a millennia, if not the most populous civilization. So it's pretty normal for them to have a lot of people. You see, however, under Mao Zedong, within the first 15 to 20 years of the Communist Party rule, Chinese population grew by 125%. So it's in 1953, when the first census was taken, China had around 600 million people, and then by 1969, that number had grown to 800 million people. And much of this growth was due to the baby booms that followed the Great Leap Forward in the 1950s and then the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. So pretty common practice for humans is whenever something bad happens and a lot of people die, typically the next couple years after that's over, there are a lot of children. And that's what we see coming out of China. So again, 125% increase in around 15 years, effectively. So what does this mean for the late reign of Mao Zedong? In 1970, economic growth stagnates. And it's effectively blamed on population size, so no reforms to economic institutions are pursued. And what this is kind of interesting because throughout Mao Zedong's early rule, he had acknowledged that overpopulation could be a problem in the future, but it was never something that was like at the top of his agenda, and he often actually promoted lots of children and growing the population. And this is primarily because, again, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, famines, a lot of people died. He was trying to like replace the people that died, so he never put population at the forefront of his focus. And in 1970, when economic growth stagnates, he sort of flip-flops and points the finger at population size. In 1971, we see the first Chinese family planning campaign. It's technically voluntary, however, the program itself was very coercive. It's called the OneChild program, or later, longer, fewer. And the later meaning later marriages, longer intervals between children, and fewer children altogether. And there was like a saying that went along with that, that's one child isn't too few, two is just fine, three is too many. So effectively, again, this is a voluntary campaign. It's a voluntary program. And the target was to reduce the number of children and the family sizes of these people, of the Chinese people, sorry. So we see it's pretty effective. It halves the total fertility rate within around a decade. So from 1971 to 1979, we see the TFR drop from 5.8 children per one woman to 2.8 children per one woman. So you can see that's a pretty severe decrease in family size. That's going from just under 6 children in every family to just under 3. So moving forward now, we're getting into the one-child policy itself. Under Deng Xiaoping, he had actually been a longtime advocate for population control in China. However, was purged during the Cultural Revolution in 1966. He was pushed out of the CCP and wouldn't rise to power again until after Mao Zedong's death in 1976. So in 1978, he rises to power again and he takes control of the Chinese Communist Party. And you see just a year after he takes power, he implements the One-Child Policy with the goals of stopping population growth at 1.2 billion by the year 2000, as well as quadrupling the GDP per capita up to $1,000 per Chinese citizen from the years 1980 to 2000. So moving on to see some numerical implications, specifically in regards to demography. The total fertility rate, current as of 1995, continued to drop down to 1.8. If you'll remember, it was in 1979, it was 2.8. So it's dropped by a full child. In 2015, that number was reported by official sources to actually be as low as 1.4. However, many academics actually assess it as low as 1.2. Foot stomping here that the total fertility rate needed to maintain a stable population is 2.1. So this means that for every woman, it's assuming that she will have 2 children who will each live to be around the age of 15. And in doing so, she will replace herself and her spouse. You can see clearly China is well below that number. Official sources, again, saying that it's as low as 1.4. So inevitably, if this is sustained, China will eventually begin to see population shrinkage. 1990, we see 90% of the births are to one-child families, which means single-child families are definitively the norm, and it's actually led to a, you could say, rupture in traditional family dynamics. So where Confucian beliefs would support like many sons bring happiness, you can see here just one child. This is virtually erasing siblings, aunts, and uncles from the Chinese family structure. So, as you could probably assume, the one-child policy and similar population control policies in China have created sort of a demographic crisis, coming straight out of almost 20 years of baby booms, straight into population restriction measures, dropping that total fertility rate from 6 to, just barely over 1 in under 30 years. Has had some interesting effects on the population size. What we see first and foremost is disproportionately more elderly people than there should be, and then our young people. And this is sort of a product of, again, smaller family sizes as well as extended lives. People are living longer. And it's actually created a dilemma called the 4-2-1 dilemma, and that is effectively assuming a single child who is a parent of 2 single children, they can expect to have to care for both of their parents on their own. Traditionally, in Chinese culture, parent care, elderly care is done by the children, and it's shared amongst siblings. However, you can assume in a single child home, there's only one sibling, there's only one child, and they are expected to care for both parents on their own. And then expanding further, people are living longer, that's 4 grandparents that this one single child could have to care for on their own. So that's a cumulative 6 elderly people relying on one working person. So naturally, the next step, that's a large burden to put on somebody. The next step is likely for the families to have to rely on social welfare, elder care programs in order to support these elderly people to deal with their medical conditions, etc., as they likely can't work, etc. Unfortunately, while in urban areas, many of these programs already exist and can support the elderly people, in rural areas, that's not always the case. There's pretty uneven coverage of social welfare in China, and the further you get away from the cities, the less available government support is to take care of these elderly people. And then just to give you an idea of what this looks like, this is a population pyramid pulled off of populationpyramid.net there, and it shows the you can see the sizes of population. So looking in that 30 to 34 range, you can see that that group of people, working age, it's a bigger group of population than the younger groups. And then in the 50 to 55 range, you can see again that's a big bulge in population. So all of these younger groups are going to have to take care of these older groups as they continue to move up and continue to retire, etc., and rely on other people for. The next piece of demographic crisis that China will have to deal with is an imbalanced sex ratio. And this comes down to, again, traditional Chinese values have sort of placed more importance on sons than on daughters. And that value, in combination with modern technology, in combination with only one child available to a couple, has sort of increased the rate of sex-selective abortions in China. And what this has created is, again, an imbalanced sex ratio. So already in China, you're seeing 115.9 males to every 100 females. And what this has created is an increase in human trafficking of women into China from Mongolia, from North Korea, from Russia, etc., to fill the gap of these missing women, and it's also created an increase in prostitution. And then the third piece would be labor shortages. So what this entails is, again, as that disproportionately large elderly population is retiring and moving out of the workforce, there isn't enough of a young population, a young working body to fill in the shoes, I guess, of the working elderly population. And actually, we're already seeing the implications of this demographic issue taking place. Current as of 2010, the workforce was shown to be shrinking. Moving into the present day, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is very well aware of much of the demographic setbacks that the one-child policy is saddling them with. The issue with it, however, is that developed countries like Europe, South Korea, Japan, the United States are all sort of dealing with the same problem, and that is that as income and job opportunities and education increase, we typically do see shrinking family sizes, and that's especially as women get more involved in the workforce and etc. You see shrinking families. So the one-child policy, while it may have constricted family size and exaggerated the problem, it's not the root of why China is now struggling with such a small working force and shrinking fertility rates, etc. However, the CCP did enact the two-child policy to try and encourage the population to have more children because, again, they do see the demographic setbacks. Unfortunately, that didn't really do anything. It didn't change the situation very much. And in 2021, just this past year, we see them enacting the three-child policy, again, trying to encourage the population to have more children. However, what we see is overall negligible effects. It's economically beneficial to have fewer children. That's sort of how it is. Again, this is the same problem that we're seeing in other developed nations around the world. The only real difference is that it was self-imposed for China because they were trying to push ahead for economic incentives. Yeah. And that's all I have. Thank you. Like and subscribe.